Hello, I'm Sean P. McCarthy. I'm joined again by Angela Nagel. We have another podcast for you today. And today we are joined by Malcom. He's the author of a really great article in American Affairs called America's National Security Wonderland, which talks about the deficiencies in the U.S. Navy and the military generally, the kind of Potemkin village nature of the American military empire. And we'll talk about that. But before we get there, Malcom, you were just in Washington, D.C. on a fact-finding mission. And I wanted to ask you about that and the Doge cuts. But just before we get to even that, what was your impression of both D.C. and the United States generally?
Well, I have to correct you there. I wasn't really on a fact-finding mission so much as I was participating in basically, like, George Washington University has this educational program in cooperation with the DoD, the Army, the Navy. It's called like the Senior Management Leadership course, I think. So I was invited to give a talk at that course, and I've given one before, actually. And the thing about that is just that was supposed to be a fairly easy assignment. I've stayed in Washington for 4 nights, and I only had like one lecture to give. So like I thought I would be, to borrow an expression from Hillary Clinton, chilling in Cedar Rapids. But that's not how it turned out. Because, I stayed at this place called the Dacor Bacon House, and I can't remember what Dacor is an acronym for. It's like something consular staff retired. It's basically an organization for people working for the State Department. And they have this house pretty close to the mall. For whatever reason, I stayed on like the top floor. And I only point that out because on the opposite side of the street, like literally just across the street, is the General Services Administration Building, which is one of the departments in DC, one of the sort of bureaucracies that's headquartered there. And I think on the second night, while I was sleeping in DC, the Doge boys moved in and they started like a purge of the GSA. And, listening to sort of the talk over lunch and so on, I some of the people at the program that I was supposed to give a lecture at, I sort of started looking into this stuff. Because while I didn't really have an idea, from the opposite side of the ocean in Sweden of how DC was, when I flew in, it became clear very quickly that like this was not normal. Like I'd been in DC one time before for the same program in June of last year. And the mood today was very different, or the mood like 2 weeks ago. Very, very different. And there was this kind of sense of, it's hard to describe, but basically like, I really got the sense that, okay, this is a really big thing that's going on. A lot like DC is a company town and the company is the federal government. And people were very unnerved, and like nobody I'd talked to over, the better part of a week, people with decades, people who had spent 40 years inside the federal administration, like none of them had seen anything like what was going on right now. So my impression is like this, or the impression that formed was, okay, this is just like the first as tragedy, then as farce. Like we have the Cultural Revolution in China, and now we get this stupid sort of American techno-libertarian Silicon Valley cultural revolution.
Yeah, you coined the phrase, I think, libertarian great leap forward. I think that really is sums up the Doge cuts a lot. And Angela, we talked about they're just kind of clear cutting out the probationary employees. But in your message to me, you were saying that they seem to be also having these surgical teams go in and target the people who deal with federal contracts and the people who deal with like Freedom of Information Act requests. I mean, this seems like there's clear-cutting federal employees on probationary basis, and then there's this more, let's say, targeted corruption enabling. Is that accurate?
Yes, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who were pretty hopeful about these Doge cuts, including a lot of people inside DC. That's the funny thing. Like, people inside the federal bureaucracy were actually somewhat, positive about the idea of Doge, or like the logic behind it, because people kind of realized that the system was broke and broken, I should say. And that's not really a particularly new dynamic. If you think about the lead up to the French Revolution, most people inside the French judicial system realize that like this system is broken and it needs reform. Even the people who, paid good money to be judges and so on, and sort of extracted, their salaries from naked corruption. Like, these people realized, like, you can't have a system like this. So the mood in DC was kind of similar, but people quickly realized that what was going on wasn't actually reform. It was something else. And the thing I've learned in DC, and the thing I've done a bunch of research on and talked to a lot of federal employees and so on, is that you have like two levels that Doge operates on. The first one is this great leap forward stuff. It's this, just cutting a shit ton of people. And this is just done remotely. It's done like in a very impersonal and a very sort of large scale way. And they're just firing people on probationary employment because those are the people they can fire, And maybe they have some sort of idea of the logic behind it, where it's like, okay, maybe if the government is 40% as big as it is now, like it's going to work better somehow because, libertarianism or whatever. But the people in DC sending out these mass emails saying you're all fired for cause due to like poor workplace performance reviews or whatever, they have no fucking clue what someone in a naval base in Alaska or whatever is doing. It's just sort of basically hitting target numbers. And this is the stuff that's causing a lot of takebacks as well, because they send out all of these, they start firing people, and then they realize they fire a bunch of air traffic controllers, and now their airports don't work anymore, so they have to immediately rehire them. And this has happened in several fields because, again, like there's no discernment here. There's no strategy. It's just we're firing everyone we can fire just to make up the numbers. And the thing people need to realize is that if you're going to fire a lot of people, you're going to clean up the DC bureaucracy. Going after the probationary employees is actually not a particularly good idea. Like the employment structure inside the federal bureaucracy, it kind of works like you either have tenure or you don't. And when you have tenure, it's because you've been in your position for a fairly long time. So when you get hired for the first time, you go on a fairly long period of probation. But also when you do an interagency transfer or when you get promoted, you also go on probation. So if you just say we're going to fire all the people on probation, you're not hitting like the dead weight, the people that just, do 8 hours of work every week and have done so for 40 years or whatever, and are just dead wood you need to cut out. Like, those people have tenure. If you go after probationary employees, you go after the people who are like young and new, which, if you're trying to do some sort of institutional revolution or whatever, like deep-seated reform, getting rid of all the woke people, you want the 40-year-old. You don't want the 45-year-old. So why fire them? But also, you're firing the people who get promoted or do interagency transfers. And in both cases, you either get promoted or you do an interagency transfer because you are like skilled above the norm. So interagency transfers, a lot of those people that do that regularly are sort of the cream of the crop. They have all of these talents which are in short supply, meaning that a lot of agencies kind of have to pass these people around because there's not enough of them with the skill set required. These people, like generally speaking, would never be fired in sort of normal times because sure, they're on probation for, legal reasons because that's just how the rules are set up. But like these people are, good people. But those are the ones being fired. So that is the sort of nitty-gritty, the details of the pro forma, like the stuff you talked about in the previous episodes. But that's only half the story. And what transpired on the other side of the street to where I was staying in DC is the other half. So the GSA building, the General Services Administration, this is like the lowest bureaucracy on the totem pole in Washington. Like the people working at the GSA are, I think, from what I've had described to me, like this is maybe the agency in DC with the most sort of highest proportion of Afro-American employees. And you're not going to be popular at any sort of cocktail parties if you mention that you work for the GSA. If you work for something like the agency formerly known as USAID, like that's high status. Those people are kind of have a reputation as snobs. But the GSA, like these are the white-collar janitors. Like they handle all of the carpools, all of the sort of duty vehicles of other departments like Homeland Security and the Pentagon and so on. They also handle like all of the building, like the technical services for the buildings, like the paperwork, the sort of legal leases and all of that stuff. So the GSA is kind of one of the most important departments in making sure everything else works. It's not glamorous, but it's completely required. Doge moves in on the top floor and they tape off the normal entrance to the building. And then they post like half a platoon of soldiers, like 20, 15 armed guards. And you can only enter the building through like the security checkpoint. That's basically the TSA from hell. Like you have people having to open up their coffee cups to make sure there's not a bomb hidden there or whatever. And they have to, go through the metal detector and put all their like overcoat and so on into the big scanner like at the airport. And this, nobody I talked to had ever seen anything like that in decades of federal service. Like, no, and that's not how it used to work at the GSA building. Like you had your, identity card, you swiped it and you were in. But ostensibly, like the security control was to make sure that none of these, white collar janitor accountants and so on would, kill any of the super serious like Doge personnel on the top floor. But this was just to humiliate people. Because when Doge moves into a department, when they send people in person, they do surgical firings in a way that's not really ever been done before. And here I have to kind of explain what happens when you have like big cuts to government departments normally. Like the short story of it is, if Bill Clinton says to the GSA or to, DHS or whatever, like, DHS doesn't exist during Bill Clinton's time, but whatever. Like, when Bill Clinton made his cuts in the 90s, what happened was, the department head would get a instruction from the top saying, we need to save money. You need to get rid of 25% of your workforce, because that's how many people we need to cut. That's how much money we're aiming to save. And then the department head and the supervisors would come together and they would draw up a list of all their employees. And then they would sort of tally veteran status, seniority in position, as well as annual performance reviews. And these things, these different categories, would be given like mathematical weights. When you sort of put all of that in an Excel sheet, you can work out sort of a point-based score for every employee inside your department. And once you have that point-based score, you go from the bottom, like the lowest scoring employees, and you work your way towards the top until you hit the cut line. So like the 25% of employees with the lowest amount of points would get fired. Like that's the RIF process. And this is not what Doge is doing. And also I can just add on the side, if you do a cut like that, obviously, if you have a lot of people inside your department working on something like Freedom of Information Act requests, like processing those requests, you're obviously not going to cut like 100% of those guys. You're going to cut at most 25% of the FOIA people, because as the department head, you're concerned with making sure that the department can continue with doing all of the functions, like handling every single sort of sub-department or whatever. So when Doge moves in personally, what they do is they create basically like a virtual department inside something like the Office of Personnel Management or the General Services Administration. And inside that virtual department, like they say everyone at OPM working on Freedom of Information Act requests pertaining to government contracts are now inside this virtual department, and we have a cut line like of 100%. So they come in, they fire everyone doing one particular job overnight. They do a lot of stuff on top of that to make sure that they can't hand over any of their work assignments or anything to anyone else. That's why you have all of these security checkpoints, to make sure nobody sneaks into the building on the 2 weeks or whatever they're supposed to be still working after they get fired. Nobody's allowed to come into the building and try to continue or hand over the routine institutional knowledge about these positions. And so I've talked long enough, but I'll just sort of leave this on a rhetorical question. So we have two kinds of firings. We have the impersonal ones that are happening to thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of employees, and it's just painting by the numbers remotely. And then we have the super special in-person, artisanal and really norm-violating firings. So when you have the personal stuff, what is Doge focusing on? Is it, lesbian underwater basket weaving? Is it woke, I don't know, synthetic meat shilling? No, actually, like if you're like a pink-haired, I don't know, like, fill in the blanks here. If you're the sort of spitting image of a libtard inside the federal government, you have as much of a chance of getting fired by Doge as an arch conservative park ranger in Texas. It's just based on whether you're probationary or not. Because you are not going to get fired in person. The people that are being fired in person are very low status, white collar, like legal clerks and janitors. And legal clerks and janitors dealing with what? Dealing with all of the processing around federal contracts. That's what Doge is laser focused on.
And Malcolm, why do you think that they're laser focused on that? What is actually, I think what people are trying to figure out is to what extent this is a blunder, or as you say, laser focused. Is it something that's being competently done? Is it about firing, like, for example, some people who hate Trump would say this is about firing all the people who could be potential enemies of this administration. Others say it has to do with libertarian ideology. So why that laser focused? What is the outcome exactly that you think they're looking for there?
Well, I mean, at this point, and every day new stories about this stuff comes out. So this isn't exactly an Agatha Christie mystery at this point. Because why would you fire all of the people dealing with Freedom of Information Act requests pertaining to federal contracts, and all of the people sort of making sure these federal contracts are on the level and so on? It probably has something to do with federal contracts, right? And in fact, if we look at sort of the news stories coming out at this point, there's been a ton of different attempts by Elon Musk himself and people around him to basically sneak in new, very questionable federal contracts pertaining to sort of Elon Musk's business empire. So I'll take two examples of this, though there are more. Example number one. The Biden administration had like this $400,000 contract to explore whether, you could use electric vehicles as consular vehicles for the State Department. But obviously 400K, you can't buy a lot of stuff with that. That's not even, chump change for the federal government. Well, under mysterious circumstances, that 400K is changed to $400 million with the inauguration of the Trump administration. And suddenly the contract is not about, exploring the possibility of using electrical vehicles in the State Department. It's buying, replacing all of the consular bulletproof vehicles with bulletproof Cybertrucks. And here's the thing. If we think about the kinds of places in the world where you would need bulletproof vehicles just to travel down the street. That's the third world. Not a lot of fucking Tesla charging stations in Sudan. So, spending $400 million on, replacing the vehicles you use in Sudan with EVs made by Tesla, kind of weird. Not a lot of sort of logical sense to that. But lo and behold, when this stuff gets discovered and the heat comes down, they say, oh, we were just kidding about this stuff. Contract has been cancelled. We're actually not buying these trucks now that you've made a fuss about it. But we had this idea, but we don't have it anymore. Please stop talking about it. So that's, the first story here. The second story is Elon Musk has been personally involved with the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, I think the acronym is. And so he's been taking a personal hand at that department. He's been coming in and telling people working at the FAA that they have to assist him in knocking off Verizon, like the telecom giant, from this 2.3 billion contract for airport, communication infrastructure that has been handed to Verizon in favor of Starlink. And, you're not supposed to be able to do this. Like, first of all, like Elon Musk's position as an unelected sort of special advisor who is seemingly exempt from conflict of interest laws, that's fucking illegal. Like, that's not how it's supposed to happen. Nothing like this would be tolerated normally. Like, you shouldn't even be owning a company like Starlink or Tesla, like working the job that Elon Musk is working. But to come into the FAA and say, we need to assert this 2.3 billion contract from Verizon and give it to my company, like that just goes beyond the pale. But again, you have a similar dynamic. People kick up a fuss, and then suddenly they go, oh, we were just kidding about this stuff, really. Like, maybe we were just going to give Starlink a 400 million contract to sort of on top of the Verizon contract, and then maybe we're not going to give Starlink a contract at all. So what's happening here is, it's actually quite simple in a way. If you think about what it takes to sort of steal money from a grandma in New Jersey, that's, you can do that pretty easily as the federal government. Because what's grandma gonna do? Call the cops on some bureaucrat in DC because food stamps aren't being paid out correctly? Like, grandma in New Jersey doesn't really have a lot of resources to contest sort of decisions that may be illegal or at least like out of line happening in DC. You know who can contest those sorts of decisions though? Verizon, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, all of those people. Very big, powerful companies. Very competent lawyers. The moment you try to steal a 2.3 billion contract from Verizon, the lawyers are going to pick up the phone and call the people inside the DC bureaucracy and go, what the fuck are you doing? Like, this isn't legal. The contract belongs to us. And like, these yahoos at Starlink can't even, deliver what the contract is about. So like, giving it to them is not only like completely illegal, it's also fucking retarded. Like, stop. And as long as there's like anyone with any sort of experience in that position on the other end inside the DC bureaucracy, they're gonna listen to that, pretty angry hectoring on the other side of the phone and say, yeah, you're right. So you have to clean out all of these departments completely. Like, you have to destroy all of this stuff in order to affect basically like the looting of the American state on behalf of, it's not even ideological. This is just on behalf of like these tech oligarchs. And there's actually an even better example of this, which has to do with the GSA itself. So as Doge moved into the GSA and started firing, the majority of the entire department, the GSA put up a basically a web page listing over 400 federal properties they were aiming to sell. And they specifically point out that they're interested in quote unquote innovative solutions, including lease buybacks. And you know what buildings they put up? Like the Department of Justice building, the FBI headquarters, a shit ton of buildings for like basically half the Washington Mall. In fact, half of the properties that the federal government owns essentially were put up to sale on that list. Like if you sell the FBI building, like these people aren't gonna move into some like fucking roadside motel or whatever. No, you're gonna sell the FBI HQ to some holding company owned by, a friend of David Sachs. You're gonna sell that crap for, I don't know, $100,000. And then you're gonna lease it back at 5 times what the federal government pays annually today when it's administered by the GSA. Like, there's no ideology behind this. This is just looting. This is just Yeltsin.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a classic case of when there are so many oligarchic forces trying to squeeze as much power and wealth out of the system as they possibly can. The state is not able to act in its own interests. I mean, on every level, like military capacity, which you've written about, foreign policy, and domestic economic stuff, they're not able. There's no centralized force that is strong enough to override all of these interests to do what would be best for like the state itself, America itself surviving.
Yeah, and I mean, the interesting thing here is just that, I mean, I liken what's going on here to the Cultural Revolution again, because the Cultural Revolution, if you really want to be sort of reductive here, like Mao himself had a very easy to understand interest going into the Cultural Revolution. Like his motivations were not hard to understand. Like he was losing power inside the party. He was being challenged by like powerful factions inside the sort of party apparatus and also powerful factions inside the PLA. So if he wants to keep being the leader of China, he's not going to be able to do that as things stand. So what is his imperative? He needs to crush the institutional power of the enemy factions within the party and the political institutional power of the PLA. And so you have the Cultural Revolution, where Mao essentially says that like all of the rules, all of the laws, all of the norms that have previously held society together, like none of them are in effect anymore. Children are invited to, denounce their parents. Parents are invited to sell out their own children. Civilians are invited to, take up arms against the PLA. And like we're gonna have this big cultural revolution where we quote unquote bombard the headquarters. Like he has this metaphor of putting like all the centers of power under siege from outside. And the thing about that is like there's obviously like a lot of people die during the Cultural Revolution, but it's never at the point where Mao himself says, okay, we have to kill this guy, we have to imprison this guy. No, he just sits back, like he throws the match, and then he watches as the massive forest fire just keeps sort of claiming more and more lives. Like he hasn't really created the conditions for that massive forest fire. Like a lot of the people that die during the Cultural Revolution die as part of like these latent ethnic conflicts going back to like the Taiping Rebellion in some cases. But all of that is just brought to the surface again and sort of inflamed. And in the end, like he kind of gets what he wants. He ruins the social stability of China, and he also ruins the political position and the institutional power of many of his enemies. And Elon Musk, I think, is doing a cultural revolution in the US in a similar way. Like he has help, of course, from Trump and from others. But his motivations are extremely simple to understand as well. Like Elon Musk is part of a dying class of oligarchs. Like the entire tech sector in the US is just, it's like the polar bears on the melting ice shelf. Like, if we think about what tech means, it means stuff like social media. Okay, well, social media is not a fucking growth market. I'm sorry. And, the Chinese are kind of in the driver's seat in many ways when it comes to social media. But moreover, like, the market is tapped out. Like, Zoomers are not going to be spending more hours on social media in 2 years than they spend today. Like, we've hit some sort of like soft cap for that stuff. So social media is not a growth market. Okay, well, electric cars, Tesla. Tesla is a dying company. This is the company that represents the lion's share of Elon Musk's wealth, and it's fucking collapsing, like in real time. EV sales have fallen in Europe by like 60% in less than a year, or Tesla sales, I should say. The stock price has gone down more than 50% in less than a year, and it's gone down like, I don't know, like 45% in 2 weeks or something. The stock is collapsing, and also there's no possibility of growth. Like the company is deep underwater, and the Chinese EV sector, like you cannot compete with that. It's literally impossible. The Chinese are making high-quality EVs that retail in China for something like $6,000. You can't buy any kind of car in the US for $6,000. It's like, it's insane, like the sort of comparative advantages they have. So, I mean, Tesla is screwed. There's no other way around it. And Starlink and SpaceX and stuff, like these are just completely dependent on government handouts. Like neither company can survive commercially. It's all about like the federal money.
I don't know if you'd agree with this, Malcolm, but I think that I'm very interested in how there's, particularly led by Elon Musk, this massive wave of anti-EU propaganda online. Like I just see it constantly. And it goes from kind of, they're being too aggressive with their legislation and their tariffs to like, oh, this is like a bunch of idiots who don't know what they're doing. But it seems to me like Elon Musk's reason there is that he does not want the federal institution of the EU to be putting up any walls to his expansion into that market, because without that expansion, like for example, they could easily with just a few laws block all these companies and set up European continental alternatives to them. So it seems to me that's what Elon Musk is doing there. That's why he's spreading he's trying to encourage European audiences to distrust the EU bureaucracy for that reason. Do you think that's plausible?
I think so. I would say that, I mean, that theory, the problem with it is that it probably doesn't go far enough, actually. I think sort of to expand on what you just said, what Elon Musk is actually doing with regards to the EU is kind of like what you filthy Americans call a Hail Mary pass, right? In football. It's like he doesn't just need the EU to sort of not do all of this horrible European legislation. Like, obviously he needs that, but more to the point, what Elon Musk really needs is handouts. He needs sweetheart deals. He needs government handouts. He needs basically, the sort of contracts you can only get if you're friends with, friends of Yeltsin. He can get that in the US, he hopes. But to get that in Europe, I do think like what we're seeing is a fairly amateurish attempt to basically meddle in all of these European countries like Germany. He's made interventions in the UK where he says, oh, I don't think Nigel Farage is up for this. We need another guy. And it's like who asked you? But the point of that, I don't think, is ideology. Like he is trying to see if he can find someone who will be indebted and frankly stupid enough to go like, oh yeah, like when I'm the Chancellor of Germany, we're gonna replace all of our consular vehicles with bulletproof Teslas.
Yeah, Malcolm, I really do like, I think your explanation is the most compelling that I've found so far, just because I've been watching everything with Doge, and I really don't like to assume ruling class stupidity. I think a lot of people had this error of analysis with regards to the Iraq war, like it's such a fiasco and a disaster, and that usually is just because you assume, you take the rhetoric at face value, it served the purposes of destroying a state that threatened Israel. But then I've been watching this and I'm like, these people are killing the golden goose. Like, how stupid and short-sighted can they be? And my understanding of your explanation, and I think, again, it compels me, is the idea that essentially they don't have a choice. Like Musk and a lot of the tech sector are kind of dead men walking, so they have to take this Hail Mary. And I just wanted to say, with regards to the leasing back federal properties, I think that's absolutely going to happen, or at least they're going to try. And it's just it's kind of inevitable, because that's, what private equity does in the private sector, is they'll buy up a company and then they'll just create a new shell company, and then they'll sell off the company they just bought. They'll sell all its property to this new shell, then they'll rent it back to it, and, eventually do a bankruptcy. It's just identical to a mafia bust out. So it kind of it makes sense that this would eventually kind of come back to the public sector, where these people, Musk and kind of the tech allies of Trump, kind of think it's worth the risk of massive public backlash and collapsing the state potentially, because they have to do this Hail Mary in order to parasitize the state directly. Is that an accurate reading of what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, if you think about the task of stealing federal contracts for your dying company from actual sort of people that matter, so Lockheed Martin and Boeing and General Dynamics and so on, these are not companies with which you want to fuck normally. If you're some, wide-eyed Silicon Valley investor with a big dream, and the inability to wear a suit and a tie, these people will chew you up and spit you up. Just like, the PLA is not something you really want to mess around with too much, if you're Mal. But if you can get this rolling sort of, quote-unquote cultural revolution going, you can undermine the sort of structures that these companies would depend on. Because again, they have to tell their lawyers to get on the phone with the people in Washington, and there are rules. Well, if there's no one there to pick up the phone, maybe you can get away with it. And if you need to fire everyone who sort of manages the carpools and the leases and the maintenance on all the federal buildings in all of the US, and you have to do this like performative mass firings of like tens of thousands of people from the Veterans Administration and, the sort of Department of Agriculture and so on as a smokescreen or as ideological cover, because that's what like the MAGA masses demand. Okay, fine. Like it's just slash and burn. But yeah, these people are so desperate, and you can see that in the actions of the Trump administration. Like all of this shit with the crypto scams being run by Trump and the people around him. Like it's just so blatant. Not only do you have like the Trump and Melania coin, obviously like it's not Trump running that, it's like underlings. Not necessarily like his old real estate pals. It's just like these tech bros that are like doing it on his behalf. But if you think about the other stuff, like the U.S., Trump announcing that the U.S. is going to create a sovereign wealth fund of crypto. And Trump says that, and then he announces beforehand, like the 5 currencies that they'll buy. And lo and behold, some anonymous guy took out like a 50x leverage loan to buy like 200, 300 million of those cryptocurrencies a couple of hours before the announcement. Like, this is a handout. Like, this is welfare to the Silicon Valley crypto bros. Because they're not doing so hot.
Well, with the time we have left, I wanted to talk about your great article, America's National Security Wonderland. And I think it's really been vindicated with this failure to, well, they're trying to bomb the Houthis again. And I think it's just, it kind of blows my mind, because I think these people do know the lack of capacity of the U.S. military. Like we get it from the U.S. Navy that they've admitted that China has 200 times the shipbuilding capacity that the United States does. But I don't understand why they're, let's say, letting the entire world know that they can't actually protect global commerce, that the Houthis are now enough of a match that the U.S. no longer has full spectrum dominance, because it seems like, maybe they at least know in their hearts that the U.S. empire and military has become a paper tiger, but we've become so dedicated to Israel that we're now willing to, I guess, expose this to the world. But what are your thoughts on kind of the failure of Operation Prosperity Guardian and this conflict in the Red Sea with the Houthis?
What I would say, as a very general point here, is just that what you need to understand in 2025 is that the absolute maximum sort of time horizon that anyone in the Trump administration in particular, but maybe in the American political system in general, is operating from today. It's like, mid-late 2028. So, 3 years plus change from now. After that, nothing matters. So, like the time horizon here for like there's no planning for the future. There's no, like, all of this stuff, all of this positioning in the Red Sea and bombing Yemen again. Like, this is about, polling results, maybe up until the midterms. And after that, sure, everything can collapse. These people aren't planning on fighting China. They're not planning on keeping up the global American empire for 10 years even. Things are collapsing, And the U.S. is heading towards some sort of like great French Revolution kind of denouement here. It's and like we are, 2-3 years from that at this point. So if you think about the Red Sea, just to take an example here, in practical terms, the U.S. is using, I think Israel at this point is eating up like 60% of the production of conventional bombs from the U.S. So one tiny country like Israel doing a colonial policing action is now consuming the better part, like the majority of the total armament production of the United States. There's nothing left for China. And to take the Navy here instead of the Air Force, the Navy doesn't use a lot of gravity bombs. The Navy, quote unquote, produces something like, I don't know what it is now. It might be as low as 80 Tomahawks per year. And when I say produces, I don't actually mean produces. I mean they take a 20-year-old Tomahawk out of storage and then, do some maintenance on it to make sure that it can still be fired without exploding in the launch cell. That's Tomahawk production. Because this is a podcast, you can't see me doing these massive air quotes right now, but I'm doing that.
Can't see you doing the jerk-off motion.
Yeah. So, okay, so the U.S. doesn't actually produce any new missiles, like Tomahawk missiles. And it doesn't have the money to either. Like, there's no money in the budget. And so, I don't know how many there are left. But, like, this campaign in Yemen, it's consuming a shit ton of them. Like, way more than the annual quote-unquote production of missiles. There's no plan to replace any of that. We're in the last days, ladies and gentlemen. Like, we are in the last frenzied months, maybe years if we're lucky or unlucky, of looting before it all collapses. And there's like a theory now that actually has a lot of adherents that basically Trump is actually playing like 12-dimensional chess with all of these insane threats with tariffs, where it's like, we're going to do tariffs on Canada, and the tariffs last for 8 hours. And then they're off. And then it's like, okay, 8 hours after that, he said, well, we might be putting the tariffs on tomorrow. You just have to wait and see. This is completely fucking insane. Because either you need tariffs for, I don't know, industrial policy or whatever, and then you should just tell your companies, okay, the tariffs are coming, they're going to be at this level, you better make preparations. Or you only use them as a sort of trade negotiation, and then you sort of get the Canadians to the table, and then you don't threaten them anymore. But actually turning them on and off every day like a fucking light switch, all that can do is create like destabilizing unpredictability, which will ruin anyone's willingness to invest in the US. Because you can't invest if you don't know whether electricity will cost like the current rate or, will be 60% more expensive in 2 months. And Trump refuses to say either which way. But some people say, oh, this is because it's a fucking orange retard that's 80 years old. Like, you can't have any big expectations. He's just going to be doing very retarded things. But the other conspiracy theory here is, no, actually, what Trump is doing is actually quite clever. What he's trying to do is do stuff that can only wreck the economy, wreck the stock market. Why? Because if the stock market collapses, maybe all of the money fleeing from the stock market is going to go into U.S. Treasury notes. Because the U.S. has like, I don't know, $9 trillion of loans with very low interest that were taking out during, like, the good old days of zero interest policy. And they're going to be refinanced at very much higher interest rates. So if he can just, cause a recession or even a depression before then, the U.S. will be able to afford, this ruinous, unsustainable borrowing for, 3 more years or whatever before the final collapse. Just think about how insane that is. That, like, okay, we're going to have to completely wreck people's, retirements, and we're going to have to, cause a recession or depression with mass layoffs and misery. Why? So we can keep borrowing for just a little bit longer.
You know what's interesting? I mean, I think your analysis is accurate, and I just find it so interesting how delusional all commentary is on these kinds of topics. Just like with regard to the Houthis, shipping time for a container to get from Asia to Europe and the U.S. has increased about 25% due to the Houthi blockade. And then you keep seeing these people talk about the Houthis just fucked around and found out, or the Houthis are about to learn why we don't have universal health care. And it's like, well, we failed to stop them. And people, or you see these conservative commentators will talk about, compare the Houthis to like Jefferson and the Barbary pirates, and we have to go fuck them up because they're disrupting global shipping. And, that's its own kind of wonderland where they're not going to acknowledge that the Houthis have just said if we just kind of rein in Israel, just pull on its leash, they will stop. They just can't acknowledge Israel at all. But I just think it's interesting where so many people in the United States and just around the world think that because we spend more than anyone else by an order of magnitude on the military, that means that our military is better than Russia and China's. And it seems like it's just they're being faced with the reality that most of what we spend on the military is just pure graft. And I am just very curious what will happen if and when their bubbles of delusion are pierced by actual repeated failures.
I mean, what you're going to get is you're going to get like a revolutionary explosion, because you have to realize, like, this stuff about the U.S. military being like, this is why we don't have health care, fucking Houthis. This stuff is like the only thing keeping, like, the current regime together. Like, at the point where there's very little sort of social fabric left in America and very little agreement about what America even is. We're a country that has like 11 aircraft carriers. That's basically the only stuff that's left as a sort of common denominator. And everyone can see the rust on those ships, man. Everyone can realize that, like, okay, we retreated from Afghanistan. We didn't really beat up the Houthis. We were retreating from Syria. We're being kind of slowly kicked out of Iraq. The Europeans are not happy with us. We launched this big proxy war against Russia, which is just a gas station with nukes. And we lost in Ukraine somehow. And also the Chinese, which are, ooga booga, yellow monkey people who can't invent stuff. Oh, shoot. Like, they invented the first 6th generation jet plane, like fighter plane. We don't have a 6th generation fighter plane. Like, we can't afford to build one. And they build, like, they have 250 times the shipbuilding capacity, etc., etc. Like, everyone realizes this. Everyone is just waiting for the shoe to drop. Like, there is kind of this incredible, like, ideological fragility in the moment we're living in currently. which is why, like, the MAGA movement at this point is just completely incoherent. Like, in a way, when I see what MAGA is today, I tend to start thinking that actually maybe like 2016 and 2020, you know, the Bernie movement, the populist left, maybe what happened was the good end. Because, I mean, even as sort of, you know, ignoble the defeats were, it's way less pathetic than the what you see today from the right-wing populists, where they've been reduced to sort of going, oh no, like this war in the Middle East, this is going to be the good war. Right, okay, we spent more than 10 years complaining about these wars in the Middle East. Oh, no, you don't get it. This is the really good one. like what do you even say at that point, really?
Well, the horrible thing is the fact that there isn't much of an alternative, right? Like AOC is the alternative, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it really is like a regime at the end of its tether. I mean, I used to, in younger days, you know, I kind of draw the parallel with that guy in Jurassic Park. You know, at the beginning of the movie, he's like, oh, dinosaurs are so awesome. I'm going to go out here in the desert. I'm going to dig up these bones. Bam, like dinosaur bones. Like, even if they're not alive, they're still so cool just to sort of see an echo of these mighty beasts. And then, you know, he gets invited to the Jurassic Park island, and he's like, you know, he's over the moon to see these dinosaurs. By the end of the movie, it's like, I'm so fucking tired of these stupid lizards, man. I just want to get out. Because, you know, after you've been chased by a T-Rex a couple of times, you kind of realize, yeah, maybe it's a good thing they all died out. So, I mean, he's just kind of sick of them at the end. And it's kind of the same with, quote, you know, revolutions. You know, the closer they appear, like the less romantic they really seem to be. Like, maybe this is just a product of my advancing age or whatever, but I don't really see a lot of enthusiasm among younger people either. For like, it's just, everyone realizes that the system is broken, it's gonna collapse, but is there a lot of optimism, like a lot of energy for reshaping the world in some sort of beautiful / horrible / tragic way, like the old socialists? No. Like the culture is spent.
Yeah, I mean, you were saying earlier, I mean, you were referencing the French Revolution and being in DC and everything. Robert Hughes did this great series on American aesthetics called American Visions. And in the beginning of it, he says that you can go around for hours in Rome without ever encountering you know, a site of like a reference to ancient Rome, but not in America. And then it shows that he's in Caesar's Palace in Vegas. And like he was saying how like America is like filled with these references to always Greece, Rome, and the French Revolution. That's like the symbolism of all the architecture and everything. And if you think about it, like the values of America, which were Republican, that was an anti-parasitical revolution. They were able to remove this rent-based parasitical thing that was sort of killing the ability of the state and its productive capacities to be strong. And so now I feel just like in world history, the idea we've come back around to that again, right? Where the system is collapsing through parasitism. It's not done by an aristocracy or, you know, a clerisy, but it is still the same principle, which is that there are so many parasites feeding on the wealth producing capacities of the state and the economy itself, the nation, that it just can't go on.
And that's, why the Chinese state is so much more effective and powerful now. I mean, Mao has an article about killing landlords in Wikipedia. I mean, not to get too gross about it, but yes, like these revolutions, the French state was much more powerful after the French Revolution, the Russian Soviet state much more powerful after the Russian Revolution. And yeah, the Chinese have had the most recent revolution to clear out these parasitical forces.
Yeah, I mean, look, like you at some point, like I really like what the Chinese do, where they do this like probationary death penalty or whatever, where like you get the death penalty, but it's sort of, if you mess up or you jaywalk or whatever, we kill you. But like if you manage to sort of stay out of trouble, fine. Like you get to keep your head. Because like any system that doesn't have any accountability and that sort of selects against accountability, it's going to end up destroying itself. I remember people in the West basically mocking the Russians for replacing generals that weren't performing adequately at the front line in Ukraine. And it's like, okay, you get a letter or a phone call from Sergei Shoigu or Putin saying, thank you for your service. You didn't cut the mustard. We're replacing you. Oh, those primitive Russians, they're so incompetent. Like they're firing their badly performing generals, unlike us. And it's like, nobody even realized what this says about us. Because again, this is it's so obvious, like people don't even think about it, but you can't get fired for incompetence in the West. You can get promoted for incompetency, which happens pretty often. Like you're so incompetent in your position that we have to promote you. So hopefully you get promoted high enough that you can't, mess up the operational stuff. Like that's our system. And any system like that, and over the sort of the Chinese dynastic cycle, any sort of new imperial dynasty, which is very sort of dynamic in the beginning, it eventually ends up being, like America in 2025, and then it collapses. So it's not some unique Western thing. It's just that we are really in the absolute tail end of that sort of cycle. And the Chinese and the Russians are not. Like in Russia, you can actually get fired for incompetency. And you can get like jailed. Like they don't have the death penalty, so they won't really kill you unless they do. But it's like you can suffer actual consequences. But when I think about something like even Sweden, like the people I know that talked about how this war with Russia, it was going to be easy. We were going to crush the economy. We were going to loot Russia for all of its natural resources. And there's not going to be any sort of deindustrialization in Europe. Like if you ask them, okay, are you going to apologize for this? Like you've completely like ruined the future of Sweden. No. Like if this was ancient Japan, you'd hand these people a knife and they'd get the hint. They'd go on live TV, they'd take the knife and they'd fucking disembowel themselves. As a means of apology for, wrecking their country. But now it's like, oh man, like please, you have to give me another chance and then another chance after that because, okay, I was wrong about sort of deindustrialization, and now we don't have an economic model anymore. But yeah, whatever. Like, I don't feel so bad over it. So, I mean, when everyone's like that, you don't have a future, which is not a problem actually, because what's the point of keeping these systems?
Yeah, you imagine how much Elon Musk would fuck up his seppuku with all the ketamine he's on. I mean, his second would have to step in pretty early.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's Go ahead.
I think we're probably going to have to leave it there. I've very much appreciated your insight, Malcolm.
Thanks, Malcolm.
I really encourage anyone listening to this to read his article, America's National Security Wonderland. It's in American Affairs. It really updated my understanding of the current state of the U.S. military. But Malcolm, where can people find you, and just anything else you'd like to say to the people before we go?
No, I don't think so, actually. Other than I'm probably going to, or I am writing a piece on this Musk stuff that we talked about for Unheard. So that will probably be out sometime next week from the time of recording. So if you're interested in this stuff, check it out, I guess.
All right, and you, the listener, if you want to hear me and Angela, we will be back next week. We will actually have a title for the podcast this time. We promise. We know we say this every week, but this time we're going to do it for real. We'll have a title. We'll probably have a Patreon. But until next week, if you want to hear some locked episodes, you can subscribe to angelanagel.substack.com. But thank you very much for listening, and please sound off in the comments, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.